I'm King Link, and I've just finished off the turkey from Thanksgiving, so that means it's time for the Humble Choice December 2023 review. This month we have 8 games and more. So last month I forgot to mention that there was a 1-month DC Comics subscription. Apparently I wasn't alone in that because it's back this month and now it's in the list of games. I just want to mention it because I probably will forget it later. I've done an 8-hour straight stream checking these games out, though honestly I didn't really need all that time. I played over half of these titles previously, many on Xbox Game Pass, and now have a chance to take a second look and cover them in this series. So let's get on with that right away. Starting with what's on the screen.
Who told you that? Listen, Claudiana is protective as a mother should be, but I know how your father raised...
Expeditions Rome, exploring an ancient civilization through murder and dialogue trees. Expeditions Rome takes the CRPG genre and drops the player into the time period of ancient Rome. Meeting Julius Caesar in the first scenes, players will take on the role of a man or a woman who quickly ascends to a powerful military position and then joins the war efforts while trying to solve their father's murder. The writing here is good, though it does use a lot of Roman terms, so players might need to look those up for full comprehension. However, the story does seem interesting, and the battles are strategic and suitably large. The strategy RPG genre though is a mixed bag. While Expeditions Rome does a great job of making it clear what each attack does, it also sometimes feels unfair just due to how the genre uses random dice rolls or some of the stats in this game. Also, the story has a lot of historical inaccuracies which won't upset most fans, but it feels odd because the game shows a lot of love for the period as well, but that's also ignoring the pronunciation choices. And the tactical gameplay won't appeal to everyone as well. Pick this up if you like the original Fallout game, but can do with less humor. It's a strategy RPG where you get a large party, cruise around, talk to everyone, wage war on an epic scale. It might be a little bit of a niche with a heavy story and long gameplay, but it's also perfect for those who like the genre. Midnight Fight Express, brawling through a lawless city. Midnight Fight Express does a lot of things right. The start of the game has a pumping beat, the combat feels tight, the levels are well laid out, there are challenges for each level, just a ton to do. And the idea of fast-paced brawler can work. On paper, all of this is good, and in-game, everything does feel polished. The only problem is none of this really feels like it's coming together. Nothing is bad necessarily, but there's just something that isn't as exciting as each of the parts individually, and instead of a bad or a great game, it's just average. The music becomes repetitive before the first hour is up, even with different stages having different tunes. The enemies change, but not really enough. There are upgrades, but it will take many levels to earn all of them, and they don't change the game as none of them are actually required by the game. And the only thing that the challenges unlock is cosmetics that don't affect the gameplay. At least that's the story the industry's told us over and over again. Again, nothing's really bad about this, but my excitement went down over the first hour just as it did the last time I played this in Game Pass. Pick this up if you want an interesting case study in how a game just fails to come together or just want to beat 'em up for just a short while. Sadly, that's all this ends up being, and it's a shame, but I will say that with everything working here, I'd be interested to see if the studio can turn it on with another title that meshes a bit better because the framework is here. It's just, something is missing.
I want to see Kaya.
Elex 2, a sequel to a game that I've forgotten. Elex 2 is going to appeal to a certain type of person, and that person probably already owns it. This is from the same company that made Gothic and Risen. The player that loves the studio, their characters, their convoluted story, and the gameplay that's not made to be accessible is going to love this as well. However, this feels like a hard game to love, as do most of the studio's titles. Risen feels like a series that arrived about 5 years too late and just was a bit of a dated relic, and Elex 2 has that same feeling. For an action RPG, there are interesting ideas, but this isn't going to compete against Starfield or Cyberpunk 2077. And feels more like a niche game even in the action RPG genre. It's really hard to say what new fans the studio is going to be picking up in 2023 who haven't played one of these titles before. But worse, the story here feels obtuse in that it expects the player to already have played and really studied the first game. If you haven't, the game will name drop a lot, and while you might be able to pick up things through context, this is a continuation of the story not intended for new players to be able to integrate into the tale, at least in my experience. Also, there are bizarre things like a Billy Idol concert with him singing Whiskey and Pills for no reason. That still boggles me, though since that got muted on Twitch, I'm not even going to attempt to show that here. Pick this up if you like the original Elex. It was in the Humble Choice a while back, so some fans will be here, but this is for fans of that title already, especially those that remember the story. I barely remember playing it, so probably not for me. Nobody saves the world. Achievement hunting the game. You know what's better than achievements? Lots of them, and in quest form with multiple different characters and abilities that you have to use to complete the game. You then tie the completion of those achievements into progression in the game, so players are constantly pushed to beat more of the game's meta quests. And while this all sounds like a sick fantasy of people who care too much about achievements, which I do, it's also how Nobody Saves the World works. Players will change their form to use different abilities and constantly switch what attacks they're using so they can beat these mini-quests. In addition, the game has an interesting and often funny story. There's a lot to do in the game, taking about 20 hours for me to beat, and I was having a great time throughout. Still, this is a very meta quest and achievement style gameplay, so players who want to focus on the large epic journey and get annoyed by achievements in games probably should steer clear. That's most of what this game does. The art style is a take it or leave it number, and while I like it, it did take a while for me to get comfortable with those empty eyes. Pick this up if, I keep saying this, but if you like metagaming. This was an engaging title and I even picked it up myself because I wanted to play the whole thing after seeing it on Game Pass, but I'm also thrilled more people are going to get the chance to check this one out.
Whoa! Did you see that? Amazing! What did I even do?
The gunk must be suppressing the plant life somehow.
The Gunk, creating a lush, beautiful world out of slime pools. The Gunk has a beautiful moment where the player removes the last of the gunk in the area and the player flashes a green spear and the world's flora comes back into view. The moment plays again and again about every 5 minutes or so, and each one feels uplifting. The beauty being restored is never really lost on the player as they explore the massive world that surrounds them, even if it is a guided path. While there is combat, this is almost a casual game with a great story and interesting locations to discover. At the same time, there's just enough combat to make this more active than most casual games, as well as some platforming. Only a few moments have a real challenge, but it's in this weird position. The idea of cleaning up a world while investigating what caused the calamity might not appeal to everyone, but this is a unique title in that respect. Pick this up if you like what you're seeing. This is just an odd game to gauge, but I enjoyed myself and fully played through this title on Game Pass. It took me 6 hours, and while 5 of them were really great, the last hour dragged on just a little bit. But it still has an interesting tale, and I will applaud that there's a lot said in the story without being shoved in the player's face. The Pale Beyond, sailing into the frozen south to find a mysterious wreck. The Pale Beyond starts with an interview with the main character trying to join the interviewer's crew as a first mate. The game is played in a slow, story-based style where players have to make choices, but also those questions will make the player think a bit about their character's backstory. The game says that the decisions will change the crew, their opinions of players, and their morale. There are also several resources that players will have to balance between food, fire, and the aforementioned morale. The game moves at a brisk pace, but there's probably a lot more to discover after that first hour. At the same time, this does seem to be very story heavy. I'm not sure how much each of my decisions will matter, and the game pretty much forces most of the important choices in the first hour. It's just likely to be holding the player's hand, but as usual, the game claims choices will matter, and the question as always is how much. It seems that the gameplay is more about staying alive than necessarily changing the ending, but that's also where the challenge will lie. Pick this up if you like a story-based game. Parts of me was thinking about Return of the Obra Dinn due to the language and having the experience set on a ship, but that's more of a puzzle game and this is more of a narrative. Still, something is intriguing about the story so far, so it's possible I'll be playing much more. Last Call BBS, the final new title from Zachtronics. Last Call BBS came out last year. It was a bit of a surprise being announced as Zachtronics' final release. While they did release a Solitaire collection after this is more of a collection of games that never got made. There are 7 unique titles here and they range from a game where you lay out metal for a chip, a game where you automate a kitchen, and a game where you build Gundam models, which is far more interesting than it should be. But ultimately, this is a Zachtronics game, and it's all the same negatives as always. It's a game built for programmers or a logical mindset, and while I absolutely love that, it's not going to appeal to most players. There's a good amount of content, but a few games feel a little short, mostly the Gundam models for me, or at least the legally distinct giant mecha models, whatever you want to call them. I just want hundreds of them to play with. Also, this feels like prototypes the studio made but never built for a full game. It's not a huge negative, but it does feel a little bit like leftovers. Pick this up if you enjoy Zachtronics titles. I keep saying that, and this is absolutely another one for the Zachtronics pile. I adore this company. I said goodbye to them when this game came out, and looking at this once more gives me a lot of nostalgia. I would highly recommend checking this out if you ever enjoyed any of their games, and I know of their new company, Coincidence. I can't wait to see what happens with them. From Space, a multiplayer twin-stick shooter. From Space appears to be geared towards 4-player combat where players are looking around a map, lowering the infestation level, and probably at some point clear the map and move on to the next. There's a story mode and a new horde mode, though the story mostly just has missions that take you to locations, so different combat activities are going to occur. There are also 6 classes in the game, with 6 more available in DLC. Nothing stands out here, but there are a lot of issues that do seem to come up. The early guns lack an enjoyable feedback loop, but even once you get an Uzi or an AK-47, you're just doing more damage, but it does feel like you're firing into bullet sponges. The AI is horrible at times, such as when an enemy stood above me and wouldn't attempt to walk down the stairs. Big brutes don't even turn their shields as you strafe around them, and there's no self-preservation from the friendlies following you, so you have to manage traps not just for you, but one of the dumbest AIs I've ever seen in a game. Pick this up if you just play Warframe, Deep Rock Galactic, Risk of Rain 2, Diablo 4, or honestly just anything else. This one really isn't worth your time, and the community is pretty dead, on Steam charts having only 20 players at peak before the humble choice, and that's probably spot on. There's just nothing that exciting here. And that's what I have. Again, I will mention a free month of DC Infinite, but at least one person I talked to already had some problem activating that. Still, it'd be good if you're interested in reading the history of the DC comic characters. Like always, we'll take a visit to Is There Any Deal, and of course there is. There are quite a few here that are good value. I will mention Gunk is listed as NA or 0, but is $24 on the Steam store right now. Elex 2 and The Pale Beyond have never been cheaper than $12. All the titles except From Space are currently more than $12, and most games hover around the $11 or $10, so not a bad deal. The only repackaged game is From Space, but yeah. I'll also say I have played most of these with Game Pass, owning as well as beating a couple. This is actually a really solid bundle. The Gunk, Nobody Saves the World, and Last Call BBS are games I'm glad that are here. Even when I didn't enjoy the game, it's still a good addition, except for, well, one title. With that though, I'm just going to move us quickly ahead to the tier list this month and talk about that. We have 4 categories: games worth the full bundle price, strong contenders, average titles, and misses. A reminder, this is personal opinion, not meant to be about the price of the game, but more the value of the experience, and with that said, we have 1 title in that last category. Our miss this month is still playing on the screen. It is From Space. This is a game that just feels like an afterthought, both in development and inclusion. I'd love to do a deep dive with the team and find out what they were aiming for, but honestly, this just isn't good enough. For the average tier, we have 2 titles. Midnight Fight Express is our first. I really wish I had more time and I could explain more, but this is a game whose excitement really wears off very fast, and there's not much left after that. I feel like this game got a lot of mileage out of being a free download on Game Pass at launch. The other game in the average tier is Elex 2. This does seem functional, but there's so much here that feels dated. Still, even if you are interested, this does feel like it requires the first title to fully appreciate it, so try that one first and you should know if you want more. And this is how the tier list looks after half the tiers. Not bad. 5 games left. Let's move on to the 2 games in the strongest contenders. The first title here is The Gunk. I enjoyed myself with this title, but I barely talked about it after it. It's not a strong recommendation to others, but when I saw it in the humble choice, I thought, oh, I enjoyed that game. And that's pretty much a good summary of it. The other title in the strong contenders is The Pale Beyond. I enjoyed the storytelling here, but I'm sure a playthrough or 2 will be enough of this game. It's a different experience, but isn't going to really stand out too much on its own. Still, it is one of the few games in recent months that feels different, and that's a good thing. And that leaves us with 3 titles in the tier list that looks like this, so we'll just continue onwards. The bottom of the full bundle, personal opinion, but come on. One more Zachtronics game, and listen, I promise Solitaire Collection won't be up here if and when it is on Humble, but Zachtronics is still my favorite company, and Last Call BBS is still an amazing finale for them. Also, it's the bottom of this tier, which means there's 2 more games I would recommend over it. The middle of this tier is Expeditions Rome. This is a 40-hour CRPG, so there's a good length here. The strategy and the combat is pretty interesting, and the writing was good, so if you're a fan of the genre, this is a pretty safe bet. This is for fans of the style though, but there is a lot to sink your teeth into. Which leads us to Nobody Saves the World. This is a game I spent 20 hours with and I loved every minute of it. It hits that part of my brain that makes me chase after achievements, but it's also funny and charismatic, and trust me, this art style will grow on you, or at least it grew on me. This was a ton of fun, and like I said, 20-hour title, easily worth a strong recommendation. And that's what we have this month. This is the final tier list, and with that said, we can move on to some alternatives. I do highly recommend this humble choice, but if you want something a bit different, well, let me offer 2 alternatives. These will be available until 2 weeks after I release this video. I believe it ends on the December 21st. First up, we have the Uplifting Adventures bundle. This seems like a nice, cute bundle. I can personally say Tinykins is an amazing game. It's like Pikmin on the PC, and that's something I've wanted for a long time, so this might be worth checking out. Honestly, I'd love a sequel of that one too. The other bundle I'll call out is due to people always saying they want JRPGs. Well, here you go. Note that's 7 games and a coupon, not the same thing as a come on Humble, you know that. But I can say Edge of Eternity is pretty good, Bug Fables is almost like a Paper Mario style game, so those I can recommend. The others are new to me but should be interesting enough. And that's what I have. Now this is the end of the year, which means I'm working on my best of the year list, and I'll try to fit that in with several other things going on. If you didn't see last month, I released a second video, a retro review of Dolphin for the Atari 2600, where I talked about the game, but I also talked about the achievements that I made for it on Retro Achievements, and if you want to check that video out, I of course would appreciate it. I'm hoping to have some news on that front, but it's kind of out of my hands at the moment, so maybe we'll have a second video this month, or maybe January might be a little overcrowded with videos. We will see. With that said, if you're interested in the humble choice, my retro reviews, or even what I thought of last year, subscribe, ring the bell, and keep an eye on this channel. If you prefer, I do have a Discord channel that will also pop up, and I welcome all of you there. So I'll pop up that retro review here, and I'll also link to my send-off of Zachtronics. It is a bit sad, but honestly, it's also a good memory because they gave me a lot of hours of interesting gameplay. See you next time.